Hello world, Dr. D here. If you're involved in human rights activism, you've probably seen campaigns by groups like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, and they are addressing human rights violations in North Korea, Syria, Iran, or even the United States. And they will ask you to do things like write a letter, write an email, write a telegram to some world leader asking them not to commit these abuses. Well, all right, that's easy enough, write an email, sure. But you might wonder, what good is this going to do? Is the president of a foreign country going to listen to what I have to say? I mean, I'm not a celebrity. Nobody cares what I think. Why would writing them a letter be useful? Does this actually work? And the surprising answer to that is yes, it does. And in this video, I'm going to describe how and why it does work. How does international human rights activism work? The basic model we use to explain the system is called the Boomerang Pattern. It was first described by Margaret Keck and Keck and Sikkink in their book Activists Beyond Borders in 1998, although the actual technique has been used for much longer than that. Here's how it works. It starts with what's happening in State A, and what's happening isn't good. The government of State A is committing human rights abuses, maybe jailing political opponents for no good reason, or practicing systemic racism, or suppressing the media, or so on. But there are human rights activists in State A. In the model, they're labeled NGOs, non-governmental organizations, a term you hear a lot in activism. These are nonprofits, charity organizations, if you will, which are fighting for human rights. They may be bar associations, dedicated human rights defenders, religious organizations, or even labor unions. These NGOs are local, operating only in State A. So in order to distinguish them from the big international NGOs, I'm labeling them as local NGOs. These are groups like the Cambodian Center for Human Rights, the Survivors Foundation in Guatemala, or Access to Justice in Nigeria. There are hundreds of such groups around the world. In this case, they are trying to stop the government of State A from committing abuses. The problem for them is that they are not working in very democratic countries. Their government suppresses their efforts to bring justice to the country. It imprisons activists, censors the internet, breaks up protests, shuts down radio and TV stations. And if it really wants to play hardball, it will burn down the NGO's offices and send paramilitary thugs to murder the activists. This happens all the time. This is what is referred to as the blockage to the NGO's activism. The blockage is that the government is shutting down their efforts for justice and freedom. If there was real democracy in State A, there would be no blockage. This is where the big international NGOs come in. The local NGOs, blocked from pressuring their own government, ask for help from organizations outside their country. And by the way, don't think that these small local human rights NGOs need the help of the larger organizations because they're somehow incompetent or unwilling to do the work themselves. It's as far as you can get from the truth. In these small local NGOs, this is where you're going to find most of your human rights heroes. These are people who are on the front lines of fighting for human rights. They face many dangers from the oppressive governments in the countries they're working in. They're in very difficult circumstances. Usually they're working for no pay at all. And although they are experts, sometimes the powers arrayed against them by the oppressive governments is more than they can handle on their own, and they need some help. The local NGOs send reports of the abuses to the international human rights NGOs, which investigate the claims and decide if they're legitimate. If they are, they get to work in the case. These NGOs are quite diverse. They may be the big international players like Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch, or they may be smaller solidarity groups like Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. What's important is that they operate outside of State A. These NGOs are based in countries with strong democracies where they can operate without interference, so they do not have to face the same blockages as the NGOs in State A. Furthermore, the big international NGOs have large memberships of people around the world. Their size, large budgets, and ability to operate freely give them an advantage they can use to help the local NGOs. So the international NGOs apply pressure on State B on behalf of the blocked NGOs in State A. What kind of pressure? They spread the word of what the oppressive government in State A is getting up to. Now people in State B are upset about this and want their government in State B to do something about it. By the way, State B in the diagram could be any country with a sufficiently strong democracy to allow for activism, but actually the activism is happening in many State Bs all over the world, trying to bring maximum pressure against State A. Now, this pressure that's supposed to be coming from State B onto State A, why would the government of State B try to put any pressure on State A? Why does it care about human rights violations in State A? It's because the people in State B do care about the human rights violations. Remember, these are democracies to one extent or another. The leaders have to listen to their people, or pretend to, in order to get elected. If enough voters in State B think that human rights abuses in State A are important, then it becomes a political issue in State B, and the government of State B is going to respond in some way in order to win votes. How? What kind of pressure can State B bring to bear? All kinds. If State B is a big, powerful country, it probably provides a lot of foreign aid to other countries. Suppose voters in State B want their government to punish State A for its abusive behavior. The government of State B could cut military or financial aid to the abusive state in order to court voters. It could hit State A with sanctions to hurt its economy. It could institute travel restrictions. Also, the people of State B could take effective action even if their government is reticent to do so. It could boycott goods from State A or refuse to travel there for vacation, hurting State A's economy. The international community is deeply connected in many ways, so it's very possible to pressure State A into complying with human rights laws and norms, at least to some extent. This pressure is what is referred to as the Boomerang Pattern, because it bypasses the blockage set up by State A by going through the international community instead. The full explanation of all the details of this process is much more complicated, but those are the basics. So, coming back to our original question, why do the oppressive governments of the world care whether or not you write them a letter? And the answer is because the last thing they want the world to think is that they are oppressive governments. As far as the dictator is concerned, morals don't matter. That's why when you write these letters, you don't need to argue about the morality of what they're doing. You just have to let them know that you know about their abuses and that you want them to stop. That tells the dictator that foreign public opinion is starting to catch up with his nefarious actions, and he might suffer the consequences. Also, although sending form emails is the easiest option, it's not the most effective. Writing out by hand and sending through snail mail gets the most attention. It means that you care enough about the issue to take the time to do it. It means that you're someone who might also call your senator or attend a protest or post what you've heard on social media. But where's the evidence? How can you be sure that the boomerang pattern really brings pressure on the autocrats? By looking at the results of the campaigns. One of the most common uses of the boomerang pattern is to get activists and journalists released from prison. These people are the most common targets of oppressive governments. They're known as prisoners of conscience because they're in jail only for expressing their views and beliefs. International organizations often push for their release, and you can see in the news that a great many prisoners of conscience are released after campaigns directed at their freedom. Some famous examples are Aung San Suu Kyi, the Burmese pro-democracy activist, and Ai Weiwei, the famous Chinese artist who dared to defy the Communist Party. These were only two examples of released prisoners of conscience. The archives of both the international and local human rights NGOs contain hundreds of other success stories. But releasing prisoners of conscience is not the only possible goal. The objective may be to stop broader human rights abuses in a target country. For example, human rights activists forced the US Congress to stop supporting the Contra terrorists in Nicaragua. This pushed the Reagan administration into sending illegal aid to the terrorists, which resulted in the Iran-Contra scandal. And you may remember the great international effort to coerce South Africa into releasing Nelson Mandela and abandoning apartheid. Other campaigns are directed against human trafficking, the illegal arms trade, repression of the media, and so on. Now, the last thing that these autocratic, oppressive governments want people to know is that they gave in to foreign pressure. They want the people of their own country to think, oh no, we made our decision for our own reasons. We didn't bow to foreign pressure. No, not at all. Well, of course, they're going to say that in order to keep credibility with the people of their own country. And also, you don't want to admit that the activism worked. You're only going to inspire these troublemakers to more activism. Well, in that case, how can we be sure that it really was the activism that caused these oppressive governments to take the actions that they did? Because the governments give themselves away by complaining about the activists. They'll complain that the NGOs are lying or being unfair, even when the evidence of their abuses is obvious. If the activists don't have any power, why does the government fight back? Their pushback proves just how effective the boomerang pattern is. So I'll tell you a story. When I was 16 years old, as part of a campaign for Amnesty International, I wrote a letter to military leaders in Guatemala asking them to stop their troops from abusing people. This was back in the 1980s when there was a lot of that in Central America. Um, I actually got a letter back from a Guatemalan colonel who was assuring me that he was investigating violations by his own troops and make sure that this would never happen. And if you're familiar with the Guatemalan military was doing in the 80s, that's kind of like the fox promising to investigate who broke into the hen house. But anyway, why would this Guatemalan colonel write a letter? And this wasn't a form letter. This was typed and addressed just to me. Why would a Guatemalan colonel write to a 16-year-old in New Jersey? I'm nobody special. The reason is they know the power of the boomerang and don't want to get hit in the head by it. They need to control the narrative, and they know it. That is the best proof that the boomerang does work. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother replying or trying to control the narrative. Now, would you like to get involved in this international human rights activism? Would you like to hit the oppressive governments in the head with a boomerang? It's easy and fun. I'll show you how to do it. Down in the description box, I'm going to put some links to some of the larger human rights NGOs, and you can go onto their websites and check them out, see the campaigns, the actions that they're carrying out, and you can get involved. It's a lot of fun.